I gotta tell you, after last week, I tried as hard as I could to work in showing off my vinyl to this message. I could not. So sorry, you're gonna miss out on what I have in my collection. Ask me afterwards, I love to brag on it. It's pretty good. So this week, we're going to continue our series of Been There, right? Places Jesus has been where he is understanding what we are going through. And so I want to start with asking a question, show of hands. Who has heard the phrase, patience is a virtue? Everybody heard that? Pretty good, okay. Now show of hands, who thinks they have this virtue? Far less. Right? I definitely didn't have my hand up. I am not good at being patient. In fact, while I was writing this, I was thinking back, have I always had this problem? And I think as I get older, the less patience I have, which I feel like is reverse. It shouldn't be going that way, but it is. I'm getting less and less patient as time goes on. I label myself what I call an eager McBeaver, just because it sounds a lot more playful than I'm impatient, right? A couple examples of this is when I got a package coming in the mail, right? The second I get the email that the order's been placed, I'm refreshing it. When's that label created? When's that getting shipped out? Okay, it's in New Jersey today. Let's think, okay, why is it in West Virginia now? I feel like it should be much further. It's been 2 days. It should be here already, right? My wife can attest to this. And then the day it's out for delivery, I'm like, okay, well, the post office is typically drops our mail off at 2 o'clock. We're the last house on the route. Sometimes it's here at 12:30. So I should be watching for it right now because I'm excited, right? Sometimes, now this happens once in a blue moon, not very often, but there's this amazing thing called DoorDash. We live out in the middle of nowhere, so it's extremely expensive. So it doesn't happen very often, but every now and again, the stars will align where there's no food in the house, and my wife and I are like, I don't want to drive into town to get something. Let's just order it. Let's take the hit, right? It'll be fine. But one of the things on that is you can watch your driver through GPS on the way to your house. And so I'll sit there and be like, why would you take that route? You could have gotten here 8 minutes faster if you had done this. They missed the turn. What are we doing? This is awful. Right? The late, great Tom Petty said, waiting is the hardest part, which I believe he took that from a quote he heard Janis Joplin saying, she loves to perform, but waiting to go on stage is the hardest part. Now, those are things that I'm eager and excited about that are good, right? But waiting's hard in different ways. Waiting's hard when something bad is going to happen, right? Maybe you've got some medical issues and tests have been sent off. You're waiting to hear what that's going to be. It's stressful. It's not a fun wait, right? You're like, I pay thousands of dollars for my insurance, and it's taking a month for them to figure out what is going on. That's not fun. Maybe you've been having some difficulties at work, and then a surprise meeting gets scheduled with your boss, and you're like, uh-oh. Wonder what this is going to be about. Oh boy. Maybe one of the longest waits, it feels like, is election night, right? That's not fun. I feel like in this day and age, it shouldn't take 3 days to count votes, but it does. Like, how is this not an instantaneous running tally that every time somebody presses the button, it should count? Why does this take days to do? So in the same vein of it being hard to wait, or you're just playing bad at waiting in general, how are we in waiting when it comes to God? Do you ever feel like God takes too long? Maybe you've been praying for a long time, right? Maybe help with an illness. I've got a rare autoimmune disease called ankylosing spondylitis. Fun word to say, harder to type. But it stinks. There's no good research or information on autoimmune diseases. So just wait until they have a breakthrough. There's no good relief from that. Maybe you've been praying for fixes with family issues, right? You've got that one family member who just always causes a ruckus. God, please, calm this person down. Tell them to chill out. Maybe you struggle with depression. For as long as I can remember, I've struggled with that. Life is hard. Life is not easy. And I remember praying, like, why am I just so sad? Why is life so difficult? God, why won't you help me with this? It felt so silent. Maybe you've been praying for a child for so long, and nothing is happening. You don't know why this isn't being granted, why there is no help with this. And you start to wonder, is God even listening to your prayers? Why is he taking so long? And if you've ever felt any of these things, if you've ever wondered this, know that Jesus understands. Jesus has been there. I said the thing. So we're good. Just because we're not hearing from God, or we're too much of an eager McBeaver, it does not mean God is not working in us or for us, or that because we are impatient, God is going to change or rush his plans. If I had $1 for every time I've heard one of our kids say, hey, is dinner done yet? Is dinner done yet? I could retire. It's like, no, I will let you know when the food is ready. Right? Why would I just make it and plate it and then be like, oh, they'll show up eventually? Right? But just because they're like, I'm hungry, I won't stop asking. I'm not going to be like, okay, here's this undercooked chicken. Roll the dice with salmonella. Right? That's not how it works. So God's not going to rush his plans just because we're being impatient. Like Aaron said earlier, God's timing is his and not ours. Jesus understands that things can feel slow. I'd be like, well, when has he felt that? Well, let me tell you this. Jesus was born, and I can almost guarantee that from birth he knew what his purpose was. Can we agree on that? Does that make sense? But he still had to wait 30 years before he could start his ministry. 30 years he had to wait. And that's already knowing what he was supposed to do. Right? If you told me at like 4, it's like, you're going to be doing this, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to start practicing that now. I'm going to do that now. I'm not going to wait 30 years to start it. He had to wait 30 years until he could start his public ministry. The Gospel of John, one of the 4 Gospels that covers Jesus' life, he focuses on time the most. Some people say John was obsessed with time. And that book, John references, depending on the translation, the time or the hour, 35 times. Far more than any of the other books. So in John 2, verses 3 and 4, a little bit of backstory to this. Jesus and his mom are at a wedding party, right? Festival. It's a big no-no back in the day to not have supplies. If you run out of food or drink, big shame. Everyone's going to talk about it forever, right? You don't do that. That's bad hospitality. So they're sitting there, and in verse 3 it says, the wine supply ran out during the festivities. So Jesus' mother told him, they have no more wine. Now pause right there, because I don't know how you guys are reading this, but keep in mind it's his mother, and it says she told him they have no more wine. At first, that can sound like an observation. They're out of wine. But if you have had enough time with a spouse or your mother, you know they have no more wine is not a statement. It's a like, do something about it. The trash is full. The basement flooded again. Right? The brakes are bad. That means do something about it. But Jesus responds in verse 4. He says, dear woman, that's not our problem. Jesus replied, my time has not yet come. Right? Jesus is saying, God has not given me the green light to do this. We have to wait. The time will come for it. It's difficult to wait, especially because we know God can do whatever we're asking for. Right? There's not been a single prayer or request that God's like, yeah, that's a little too elaborate. Try something else. That doesn't exist. There is nothing that God cannot do. So then you start to ask, okay, well then why isn't it happening? If he can do it, why is he not doing it? So what is God doing while we're waiting? While we're waiting, God is working. For since the world began, no ear has heard, and no eye has seen a God like you, who works for those who wait for him. Isaiah 64:4. Okay, God's working while we're waiting. How is God working, you might ask? He's working on it. Whatever it is that you're wanting, if it has not happened yet, the odds are it isn't ready yet. Or perhaps this one's a little harder to hear, but maybe it isn't taking so long because he's still working on it. Maybe he's taking so long because he's still working on you. Maybe it's the way that you interact with people, the way that you handle money or your emotions or your character. God can fully develop you and train you and grow you if you are depending on him, if you are working on his time. Sometimes God does something in you before God does something through you. Let me say that again. Sometimes God does something in you before God does something through you. While you are waiting, God is working. So you might ask, okay, then what do we do? What do I do while I wait? Well, something that helps me is keeping in mind that while I'm being impatient and I'm waiting for this thing to happen, and I've been praying over and over and over and over like I refresh the tracking number, is to keep in mind that God is working. Keep in mind that God is working. If you keep in mind that God is working, it's harder to waste your wait. And what I mean by that is if you keep in mind God's working on this, God is preparing this, or God is working on me, God is working through me, then you need to wait faithfully. So do not waste your wait. What does waiting faithfully look like? Well, do what you need to do to bring you closer to God. I preached a message, I don't even know how long ago. It feels like it's been 2 years, and I know it's not, because we've only been doing this for one. About how we question whether God is still speaking today in our lives. And the number one way God is speaking is through the Bible. So if you're like, I've been waiting for God to do this, I'm not getting much of an answer, what do I do? Read his word. Because if he's going to give you an update or tell you what's going on with it, it's going to be through there. Another big thing is prayer. Talk to God, right? It makes more sense to have an open communication than to be like, God, I want this. All right, I'm not talking to him again until it's done, right? That's not healthy. That's not how things work. Since the Garden of Eden, the beginning of time, all of creation, to the birth of Jesus, the world was waiting for a Messiah. It had been prophesied over and over and over again that he is coming. And generation after generation, right, that's a long time, had asked, God, why are you taking so long? This has been prophesied so many times. We are hurting. We are waiting. What is taking so long? Why have you not answered this? Why have you not fulfilled these prophecies? And we have now something wonderful called hindsight that they didn't have back then. Hindsight to see that the world wasn't ready yet for the Messiah, which is an interesting thing to think about. The world was not ready yet. For those of you who don't know, there was a time in the Bible called the intertestamental period. Intertestamental. There's a couple other words that are going to be difficult today because I'm dyslexic and nervous, so bear with me. But the intertestamental period was a 400-year gap. 400 years between the Old Testament being finished writing to when the New Testament began. Right? 400 years between Micah and Matthew. During this time, God wasn't really speaking. Right? A lot of the times in the Old Testament, the way God spoke was through the prophets. None of them had a single thing from God. None of them had a single thing to say on his behalf. Nobody was having these amazing visions or dreams or prophecies revealed to them for 400 years. Right? And that's a pretty big change because that was pretty normal back then. How many times do you think people had wondered how long it was going to be? Or had wondered if God was even listening? Sometimes it can feel like we are in that intertestamental period in our lives. That no matter how hard we pray or how long we've been asking for a sign, he feels silent. But know this, just because God is silent does not mean that God is absent. Silence is not absence. While we are waiting, God is working. And in those 400 years of silence, God was preparing. Galatians 4:4 says, when the right time came, God sent his son. The timing was perfect. Everything was in place for God's plan. The timing could not have been better. I want to give 3 examples of what that perfect timing is. There's plenty if you want to read and get into it. But the 3 major ones I want to talk about are 1, and this is one of those words I've been practicing. The Socratic method was introduced to the world. I had that pause because I was waiting and looking at Aaron to see if he made a face of like, that was pronounced incorrectly. I got it. The Socratic method was introduced to teaching. The Socratic method replaced the didactic method. Is that right? Okay, cool. The didactic method was the way people learned. That was the only way they were taught. You might be wondering, Darren, explain what that is. That method was just word of mouth. You sit there, listen, I tell you this history, that's it. Worked pretty well for a while. But the Socratic method was first introduced, and that way of learning, people are encouraged to ask questions. Right? Why are we learning this? Why does this matter? Well, what about this? This doesn't make sense. Right? That wasn't a thing before. So the direct teaching of truth is now replaced for the first time in history, encouraging people to question what is happening, question what they're learning and being taught. Number 2, so big reason number 2, is the Bible was translated into Greek for the first time. Up until about 280 BC, the Old Testament was only in Hebrew. That was it. So for the first time, it's translated into Greek. And number 3 is the big one. This guy named Alexander. Maybe you've heard of him. Alexander the Great, which you get a great added to your name if you have children who have children and children, or if you conquer the world. Those are the 2 ways you're getting great added to your name. Why does it matter that he conquered the world? Well, for the first time in history, there's now a common language. So everybody spoke at least a little Greek, read a little Greek, which ties into reason 2 of now the Bible is translated into a language that everybody knows. Something else happened at that time called the diaspora. Is that one right? Diaspora. Dang it. So close. 3 to 4 ain't that bad. The diaspora was the meaning. Did I mess it up again? My bad. I'm done. Moving on. What that word means is that the Jews were no longer allowed to live in Jerusalem. Why is it that word? I don't know. I don't know why they couldn't have just used banished or something. But the Jews are no longer allowed to live in their homeland, right? You guys are now no longer allowed to live in Jerusalem. So they spread all over the world. Rome creates major roads for the first time. So during the 400-year period of the intertestamental period, people were first now encouraged to ask questions. Everyone had access to the Bible in a language that they could understand. And the good news could spread in common language through Jewish people to the entire known world. This all happened in the time God was silent. His son was only brought forth when the plan was ready, only after the way had been prepared. So with the history lesson in mind of a 400-year prep time, God is not ignoring you. God is not absent. Maybe it's not ready yet. God is working on it. Maybe you aren't ready yet. God is working on you. Or maybe, and this is the hardest one of all of them, maybe God is never going to do what you're asking him to. Ooh. Isaiah 55, 8 through 9 says this. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Even that statement, those words, the pain of waiting, the struggle of waiting, the knowing that even though you're asking for something that is not inherently bad, might not happen, does not escape Jesus. This is the fact for him too. John 12, verse 23 says, Jesus replied, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." In verse 27, "Now my soul is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." That's Jesus being there. Understanding how difficult it is. In pain and suffering and fear, knowing I don't want to do this. If there's another way for this to go down, let it happen. But I know this is how it has to happen. When times feel like the wait has been so long, we can't control ourselves. We're so heartbroken in the wait. We feel so exhausted. We can say this prayer. It's very short, it's very simple, but it is helpful. Start with this. God, I believe you can. God, I believe you will. And even if you don't, I still believe. 3 short, simple lines, but are extremely powerful. As we come to an end here, I want to close out with this. Taking a moment to dwell on 2 Peter 3:9. It says, "The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some understand its slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance." And something I get from that is a thought, something to ponder through this time of waiting, is that maybe we're not waiting on God. Maybe the plans are done and God's waiting on us. How many times have we prayed and asked for answers, thought we got a response and took off on it? It's not worked out. How many times do we ask God for an answer and we're not listening? How often in our lives has God been waiting on us to look at him and understand where he's leading us? I'm going to close this out with prayer, and I just want to